is track number 4 of ElixirConf 2020. Jason Axelson is presenting a peek inside the Elixir language server. Jason, the broadcast now belongs to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. Really excited for ElixirConf. So welcome to my talk. The title is A Peek Inside the Elixir Language Server. So we're going to talk about the Elixir Language Server, which I help work on, as well as a little bit about shared governance for software projects. So first, a little bit about me. I'm really excited about Elixir. I just really love the language. I love how expressive and how specific it is. And I've been part of Elixir LS since 2019, also a moderator, and you can find me on Twitter and GitHub, also professional yak shaver. You can talk a little bit about this more later. So what is the Elixir language server? So it is a backend that helps you provide like IDE smartness for Elixir. So things like auto-completion, module docs, find references, that sort of thing. It implements something called the language server protocol, which is like a common language for backends to implement to make it easier for them. And it is also a project with shared governance. And it's usable with different editors such as VS Code, Vim, Emacs, Kate, Sublime Text. And it could be fairly easy to add additional editors to that list if people are interested. But before I get started, I want to give a big thank you to Jake Becker, who was one of the, who was the person that started the Elixir LS, Elixir Language Server project. So, and he also released it as open source, Apache 2.0, which is very gracious of him. So the project owes a huge deal of gratitude to him. So in case you don't know what the language server protocol is, this allows you to have just one project per programming language, which is great, compared to one project per editor per project. And it's been developed by Microsoft. So without the language server protocol, so we have our language that Elixir we want to support. And there's also Python you need to support, and JavaScript, and as well as other languages, for example. And so which are different editors you need to support. So without language server protocol, you have to support one, you have to write one project for each of these different scenarios. So one Emacs Elixir editor plugin, another one for Vim, another one for VS Code, and so on. And the same thing for other languages. So instead, with the language server protocol, because it's providing a common backend to all these different, a basic common interface for all these different languages to support, you can instead just create and maintain one single plugin. So that would be Elixir LS in this case. And so through that one plugin, you can support all these different editors. Sometimes there's some other extensions you'd have just for, but those are mainly just for like syntax highlighting and don't have like all the major heavy lifting for completion and diagnostics and formatting on save and all that. And same thing for all the other languages. So the language server protocol is all well and good, but it will never be the best, most integrated experience because it is serving a more broad use case. So it makes it harder to have more language-specific features. It's just not tailored for each language. So some people even consider it bloated. And there's also a few annoying sides on the language server implementer side. One of those is it requires UTF-16 support, which is not very widespread. And I think it's mainly because it's really easy to support in JavaScript and TypeScript. Also, another annoyance that there's no machine readable specification. So one of the projects I started was to try and collaborate on somebody who was working on taking what they have published, which is like some random like TypeScript interfaces, and actually extracting that into like an actual, not necessarily JSON schema, but an actual like JSON file that you could then parse and help to generate or test your implementation from. Although I ran about out of time for that that individual JDing project. So there's some different precursors that we should also honor before we get started, or before we dive into it too deep. So there's the alchemist.el extension for Emacs. So that was started by Samuel Tonini in 2014. And that was, as far as I'm aware, that was one of the first IDE extensions for Elixir. And to help support that, he created Alchemist server on the back end that you would run alongside your project, which is actually a very similar concept to the language server protocol. But this is before the language server protocol was even released. And then also there's the Elixir Sense language intelligence API/server. People don't really use it as a server, but that was started in 2017 by Marlis Saraiva. And so that is one of the, that's basically the core library that Elixir LS is built on top of. So a lot of the intelligence is coming from Elixir Sense. And then Elixir LS is adding all of the language server protocol formatting and protocol implementation specification work on top of that. So quick timeline of the project. So in 2017 is when the project started by Jake, but it needed like a lot of initial work, and it was definitely very usable, and it became a popular extension. But then by mid 2018, development of both Elixir LS and Elixir Sense had stalled. So Trevok actually is the one that instigated the Elixir LSP organization to kind of so start community forks of those. And that's when Andrew and I joined. Andrew is actually the one who created the dialyzer translation from Erlang to Elixir, which is really helpful. And so after that, we just continued development of the forks. And I'm excited to say that in 2020, the community forks became the canonical repositories. So we were able to retake over the original VS Code extension, and Marlis, who was the original author of Elixir Sense, joined with the Elixir LSP organization that we have. So why is shared governance important? So it's important to make this a more sustainable project. I know sometimes in the community, some people like to use the word forever project. It's something that just keeps going and going. So if you're not thinking about sustainability and how you're going to actually maintain all of this going forward, you might end up burning out the maintainers. So it's better to have more people involved that can take over if things some person starts to get really busy, which definitely happens. And or in case they just have to drop out of the project due to other, like, I don't know, family circumstances or what have you. So here's an overview of the main people that are involved with the Elixir language server. So I already mentioned the top level GitHub organization itself. And then on the Elixir LS core team, it's mainly, sorry, I never actually talked to Lucas in person, so I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but Lucas Samson and I. And for Elixir Sense, it's Marlis, who is, if you remember, the original author, and as well as Lucas. And on the VS Code Elixir LS core team, I'm pretty much the only one that's directly contributing there, although I don't actually use VS Code except for testing Elixir LS. So if you're interested in helping out, which we definitely welcome, that's one of the points of this talk, that might be a good place to start. And while I'm here, I also wanted to get just to talk a little bit more about why I started working on the language servers, partly because I just really want the Elixir ecosystem to succeed. And I think having a good editor experience is a big part of that. And it just breaks my heart to see like issues piling up and pull requests piling up. So there's people that want to help, but if there's no maintainer on the other side to maintain and to receive all those PRs, triage them, and merge pull requests or offer feedback on them, then the project won't go forward the way that you would want. So I kind of view my role as like a steward of the project to make sure that the steward or shepherd to make sure that things are coming in and being addressed. And then when I have extra time on top of that, then I'll do some development. But really, I have to say that a lot of the credit should go to Marlis and Lucas for doing a very significant portion of the development. If you look at the changelog, that's definitely reflected. You'll see me like trying to do 20 commits to fix up the test suite because it was breaking, and other things like that, like maintaining the changelog and posting all the announcements on Twitter and the Elixir forum, and helping people on issues, of course. So a little bit about the editor, or about the architecture. So communications all over standard I/O, which is one of the main options with the language server protocol. It's currently set up as an umbrella project just because that's how it was. I don't know if that really works well for the project. And one of the biggest downsides to how everything is working right now is that all Elixir LS runs the same exact beam process as your code. So that results in a bunch of restrictions. And for example, if we have the same library that your code is using, only one of those can be loaded inside the same beam instance. So to work around that, we actually vendored a couple of dependencies, namely the JSON parsing library. So you can have your own version of that, and then we have our own basic copy of it because we just renamed everything from the OTP app to all the modules. So one of the things you might notice with ElixirLS is that it creates the .ElixirLS directory inside your projects. And that's because working on two Elixir compilers, working off of the same directory doesn't work well, because one will think some piece of code is compiled, the other won't, and you end up with like the server like no longer running, and people just get really confused. So you see that sometimes in some of the issue comments. And so that's why you have the build directory for ElixirLS inside there. And ideally, we might put the deps folder in here as well, because sometimes code gets compiled into the deps directory, which causes problems because that is shared as well as when ElixirLS is pulling the deps. Because it does that automatically when you edit your mix file. And then definitely the dialyzer manifest is there, but this is just the dialyzer manifest for your project and for your direct dependencies. It doesn't have the dialyzer manifest or the cache for the Elixir and Erlang versions, which is what takes the longest time to generate. That's actually stored in your home directory. So one of the common troubleshooting tips is definitely to remove your .ElixirLS directory from your project and restart your editor. Yeah, stability is something that I am constantly trying to work on, but there's still definitely a lot that could be done. So what can you actually do with ElixirLS? And I thought about actually giving like a live demo here, but I decided not to because that would just be tempting fate. So ElixirLS gives you different superpowers. So one of the ones that you may not necessarily realize is the outline mode. So this is powered by the workspace symbol, language server protocol request and response. And so inside your editor, this is a screenshot of VS Code. You can actually see like this is the module we're currently looking at, xdoc. And then you can see like module attributes. You can see different function heads, so version, private functions, build config. So you can just click on any of these, and you can even see what is pattern matching on as well. So you can just easily jump to a specific area of the current file. You can find this on the left side under your file browser window. Another handy thing is completion. So this is powered by the Elixir or the language server protocol request text document / completion. So when you're typing your code here, example xdoc.markdown, put markdown, you can see what you can do auto completion. I mean, people are generally familiar with this from other IDEs, but it's definitely something that is nice to have in your editor. You can also see some docs for that function. Another one is signature help. So after you do complete a function, signature help will pop up automatically. And so it tells you that you're on the key that you're putting in. So a key in this case is home page. And then you can see what other parameter comes up next. There's also go-to definition. So in VS Code, you would do control click on a function or a module or a module attribute definition, etc. And so that's powered by a text document / definition. And that'll go to where that code is actually defined within your project. And if you hover, that sends a text document / hover request, which ElixirLS responds with the generated markdown documentation. And another thing is compilation errors. So you can see what failed to compile. And a note on here that trips people up is that currently ElixirLS doesn't support compilation errors on .exs files, such as tests, which can be annoying and I believe can be solved, but so PR is welcome. So how does this all work? So let's follow the path of go-to definition request. So that's the text document / definition request like we were talking about. So it starts with the editor LSP extension sending a request to ElixirLS over centered IO, as we talked about. And that request contains the file path inside the project, as well as a line number and column number, so that you know, so ElixirLS knows what you're trying to go to definition for. So, so this is where it kind of starts. So ElixirLS.languageServer.server is a gen server, and that's controlling the main portion, or that's like the main controller within the project. So obviously it's not the entry point. We'll kind of go a little bit over that, but this is where the work really begins. So one of the interesting things about how it's set up is if you look at our the function head here for handle request, it kind of looks like we're calling a function within the function head, which isn't allowed. So obviously, so that shows that this is a macro. So it's a macro that matches the text document / definition request that we just saw. So we'll actually show that here. So that was actually imported from the languageserver.protocol module. And so it's a macro that matches text document / definition, and it pulls out the URI, the line, and the character. So URI being the file path. So back up to the language server handling the request. So this is where the actual work happens. But in order to understand how what this actually does, we have to look at the return value, which is this async fun state thing. So that's just something that's internal to ElixirLS, and I will show how that is actually handled by the server over here. So I believe I have. So, so that's handled here. So you saw we were in handle request, and then now we're handling an async function within the request. And so that does this handle request async thing, and then it stores in a list of requests inside the server state. And so it's starting a different process. And what does handle request async do? So it gets, the gen server parent here, and it actually uses spawn monitor. I believe you could change this out with the task, but it's been working. We haven't had issues with this portion of the code, so I try not to just go and change everything, and instead just change it when it makes sense architecturally. But it's starting a new process, calling the result of your the function, which is the completion, and then calling back into the gen server itself to say that the request has finished and providing the result. So that brings us back to the asynchronous function that we saw was just executed. So definition.definition, we're passing in our path, line number, or code. This is actually the code of the file in memory, and the line and character. And it's important that is the code in memory because you may have made changes that aren't actually reflected on disk yet. And you don't want to require having passed everything through disk in order to get all your language intelligence because that slows things down. So definition is actually this language server provider definition. And I'm not going to go through everything here because it's going to kind of speed up as we get going. I just want to kind of give you an overview and a feeling for all the different things that are happening to serve this one request. But you can see that the heavy lifting here is actually done by ElixirSense. So we're just calling ElixirSense a definition, and then we're getting back different, getting back a location struct that either matches or doesn't. So ElixirSense, so is a separate library under the Elixir LSP family of projects that I talked about previously. And so it's actually serving, this is the top level definition that it's serving, and it's pulling out the subject. And here is where it's actually parsing the, so one of the things that it includes is an actual error resistant parser that parses Elixir code because this is in an editor, you can't just throw up your hands whenever there's a compilation error because the user still, you might be in the middle of typing something, but you still want your code completion and go to definition to work ideally. So I believe, so Lucas actually implemented this error resistant parser. So you can see it's another macro here, but it tries to fix the parse error when it's, and then it builds up the metadata for your current code. So once it's actually, and then it does all this, tries to fix lines and create some metadata. And then once it actually analyzed everything, then we get to the actual area where it's determining what to return back up to Elixir LS. And so there's different types. So if you did a go-to definition on a variable, then you return a location struct that represents a variable. And the current, so it's nil because it's the current file, and then we're passing in the line and column. And similar for a module attribute. And then for a function, we do a little bit more, but eventually it's returning the same location struct, which we then have to handle inside Elixir LS. So it's, variable, attribute. So that is all how that all happens inside our async or anonymous function call within our handle request async here. So now we have the result from ElixirSense, and so now Elixir LS has to process it and then send it back to the editor, but first to the language server.server gen server. So that's the gen server.call. So that's calling request finished here. So we look at the definition of that. And what this is doing is going to the code that actually formats this in in the JSON format that the language server protocol expects. What to call out here? There's just different formats. So there's a format for errors and then a format for just a normal response. And then now we no longer have to track this request that was pending. So the request gets deleted from the state. And to bring it all the way back up, so now Elixir LS has found the file path, line number, and column for that definition if it exists, and it responds back to the editor. And inside your editor, you're now looking at the definition of that object or item. So I want to give a big thank you to all the contributors. These are all the contributors that I was able to pull from the changelog. So I'm not going to name all of them, but all this work wouldn't be possible without the help of everybody in the community. So I'm really grateful for all of them. And maybe somebody watching this would like to see their name on this sort of list in the future. And to that, I say you're very, very welcome. And we are glad to have people looking. You don't need a whole lot of Elixir experience, depending on what you're trying to implement. And yeah, I just really want this to be a successful project so that the Elixir community can benefit from having a rich editor. And I will give a quick, so I'm not going to give a live demo anymore, but so I did promise to talk a little bit about yak shaving, which is working on something that's not directly related to what you're working on. So in that case, I'm working on the Elixir language server, which is running the language server protocol, and that's sending lots of requests back and forth. And so it can be a little bit hard to debug. So I actually wrote something called LS proxy. So this actually does work. This is a live view project, and it actually shows you what requests are being sent back from the server. So you can actually see how long each of these requests took, what they were. This is the request ID here. So you can look at the individual responses. I'll make this bigger. So code lenses, and it's interesting. I believe I have a go-to definition in here. So here's a text document definition. And if you look at so this is the actual, well, this is an Elixir representation, but this is a JSON response or JSON request for the file and the character in line. And then we can see the response of the server here after all the work we did. Actually is returning with the file line and character. So yeah, so basically I just got frustrated with trying to understand everything that was going on and debug why we're having different errors. And so I just wrote this whole proxy. So thank you. Thank you everybody for coming. And do we have time for questions?
Yes, we have time for one question. Thank you very much, Jason.
Okay, so I see the question is, could the language server be running in a Docker container? And the answer to that is yes, it could. So that would be another area that we'd welcome contribution. I believe that some people do. So inside VS Code, which is one of the most popular editors currently, it feels like there's a concept of the remote dev extension so that you can run the language server on a different computer. So I would work with Docker or with, or if you want to run it like somewhere on the cloud separate from your computer, that is possible, although that's not something we like directly support. But I can see that being a useful use case for people. Okay, well, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. That was a great talk, Jason.